Welcome to Practical Talk Time. Today I have here with me Charlie Edgarton, who's an intuitive astrologer and a past life regression practitioner. Hello, Charlie.
Hello, Usha.
How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. I have so many questions for you. Astrology, what do you think astrology is?
What do I think astrology is? Astrology is a combination of science and art. Astrology starts with astronomy, which is simply where the planets are in relation to the Earth at any given point in time, past, present, or future. And what astrology does is put some art into it. It puts some intuition into it. It puts some connection into it. The moon cycle is approximately 28 days, 28 and 1/3 days. It goes through the complete zodiac every 28 days. And the moon has to do with high tides and low tides. And the moon also has to do with women's cycles, their biological cycles. If you ask any cop or any emergency room worker or any hotel employee, is there any difference in your business under the full moon? They'll all go, yeah. So we all are kind of sort of familiar with a little bit of how the moon, it doesn't really affect us, but it seems to have some kind of effect on something that we respond to. So astrology simply takes that a little bit farther. In astrology, there are, at present, we astrologers use 10 planets, including the sun and the moon, because astrology is an Earth-centered system, even though, of course, we know that the sun is the center of the solar system. We still see the sun come up in the eastern horizon every day and set in the west every day, if it's a clear day. And the moon comes up in the east and sets in the west every day also. So we, as astrologers, consider the sun and moon planets, and then, of course, there are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and then we've thrown in Chiron since the mid-'80s. And then there are 4 asteroids.
What is Chiron?
What is Chiron? Yeah. Chiron is a rock out in space, bigger than an asteroid, but smaller than a planet. I believe it's between Jupiter and Saturn. It's in that ballpark anyway. Okay. Chiron has a mythos associated with its history. In a 2-word phrase, Chiron is the wounded healer.
I see.
And even though the astronomers last year at their convention decided that Pluto was no longer a planet, we astrologers go, well, if that's the way you want to be, okay, but Pluto is the same for us as it has been since it was discovered in the 40s. Pluto was discovered in the 40s. So it's the same.
So how does astronomy, connect to astrology?
Astronomy connects to astrology simply through the science of it, through the mathematics of it. I have this, any professional astrologer will have a book called an ephemeris, and it's about as thick as this, and if you open any page, it's a bunch of numbers, like what engineers have in their books. Yeah. Each page will be a 1-month span, and it will show you, the page will be subdivided for all the days of the month on one side, and then across the top it will be subdivided by all the planets. So an astrologer can pinpoint at any point in time, past, present, or future, where in the sky any of the planets will be. Most people have heard of the zodiac, most people have heard of the 12 signs of the zodiac, and most people know what sign they are. And what sign they are, whatever sign a person is, it means that's the astrological month that the person was born in. The sun in the sky was in 1/12 of the sky that was the sign, the sun sign that they are. Yeah. all of the planets, including the Sun and Moon, as well as Mercury, Venus, Mars, blah, blah, Pluto, all of the planets follow that same path every day as the Earth turns once on its axis. They all rise in the east and set in the west. But because they're all spread out in the great circle of the solar system, one planet will be rising at 7 a.m. and another one at noon and another one at 4 p.m. and another one at 3 a.m. And they're always moving in their own orbits. So it sounds kind of complicated, but it gets, if you want to study it, gets fairly easy fairly quickly, because there are 12 signs in the zodiac. Each sign is ruled by one of the 9 planets. Chiron is not included, by one of the 9 planets. Thus, 2 of the signs are ruled by, there are some signs, there are some planets that rule more than one sign.
More than one sign, okay.
Mercury and Venus, to be exact. So all of these planets are moving at different speeds, and even just as there's a full moon once every month, which makes us crazy, which can affect our mood or behavior. Which brings me to a point I always try to remember to address whenever I'm discussing astrology with a client. I say to my clients, if you remember nothing else about this reading, please remember this. Astrology defines nothing more than potential energy. And how you manifest that potential is your choice and your responsibility. So you can't say, oh, Mars made me do it. Mars didn't make you do it. Mars may have been behind you doing it, but it's your choice and your responsibility.
So there are so many systems of astrology, as I understand. So what kind do you follow?
The system of astrology that I follow is basically Western astrology, which is tropical astrology, which puts the sun in the zodiac at 0 degrees of Aries on the first day of spring. It's called tropical astrology. I'll not get into all the nuances and details about that. The other kind of astrology that is most prevalent on this planet is Vedic astrology or Eastern astrology, which is the exact astronomy. And I won't get into the nuances of what the differences are, but the curious thing is they both work. They're both about, I think, 23 degrees apart right now, but we don't want to get too technical here. But the really curious thing is that they both work, which brings me to the intuitive part. So you start with the science of the astrology, and you deal with whatever you're dealing with, whether it's a person's birth chart, which describes the potential that they have in this lifetime, or the transits, which are where the how the planets in the sky today, or last year, or last week, or next year, are affecting a person's birth chart.
Oh, speaking of birth charts.
Yes.
So what is a person's birth chart?
What is a person's birth chart? A person's birth chart is a reflection of a clear graphic representation of where the planets were in relation to the point in space and time of a person's birth.
Okay, so when you're talking about transits,
yes,
that means where the planets are moving today.
Yes, or
at any point of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a person's birth chart is a circle, and it looks like a pie, and it has 12. There are 12 pieces of pie, and those are called houses. And in each house there may or may not be planets, but in every house there are signs. And every birth chart is unique. I have a twin brother, and he has a different rising sign than me.
Oh, I see. Because of being born a few minutes later or earlier?
That's exactly right. It's really important to an astrologer in order to get an accurate birth chart, an accurate natal chart, to have as close to the exact time of birth as the client as possible. Because the Earth turns on its axis once a day, if you do the math and you take a 360-degree circle, you end up with 1 degree of that circle moving along the horizon every 4 minutes. So my brother was born 20 minutes earlier than me, and he has a Libra rising and I have a Scorpio rising.
I see.
So the time matters.
And how do you practice your intuitive astrology? I mean, do you do the fortune telling, as people call this, or do you really try to figure out what's going to happen on a general scale, or for the general people or society? So how do you look at it?
Okay, let me address there's a number of different questions inside that question. The last thing you mentioned has to do with mundane astrology. There are a number of astrologers who discuss political events and things like the birth chart of the United States. See, anything can be born. All you need is a certain point in space and time. Our country was born, most of us agree. There are some astrologers who take issue, but I won't digress too far. Our country was born July 4th, 1776. And whether you use the instant that the first person started signing the Constitution or the instant that the last person finished signing the Constitution, doesn't matter, but you end up with two similar charts. But mundane astrology deals with politics and with volcanoes and things that happen on the Earth. And then regular everyday astrology, client-based astrology is what I do. I don't pay a lot of attention. I'm familiar with the Sylvie chart, and I can discuss intelligently with other astrologers mundane astrology, but I haven't put a lot of energy into that aspect of astrology. What I do is client-based work, and I tell people in a sentence, if they ask me what I can do for them, I say I will discuss with you your strengths and your weaknesses, your gifts and your challenges, past, present, and future. So most of what I discuss with people is potential. However, in a discussion or sometimes in a reading, if I see something going on in somebody's third house, which is the house, among other things, of brothers and sisters and siblings, say Chiron is going through somebody's second house, I might say, transiting Chiron in the sky, I might say to them, are any of your siblings having any kind of health issues? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, blah, blah, blah. So I try to ask the right questions based on my knowledge of astrology. And one astrologer once said, well, we're right about 83% of the time, which is not bad. So if I'm wrong, it's more because I'm asking the wrong question, because the stars are where they are. It's just straight mathematics, straight astronomy. Well, not quite, but it's based on astronomy. So it's straight mathematics. And what I do in my client-based work, in my intuitive astrology, is try to get a sense of how what's going on, what I see going on in a person's chart. Why do I get... I try to get a sense of how what I see, what is going on inside a person's chart, is correlating or correlates to a person's present, whatever they would like me to discuss with them, whether it's finances or love or work or play or adventure or whatever it is.
So you're able to help them by seeing where the planets are in their charts and where the planets are transiting on their chart.
Yes, and so I can discuss with them. I can look up in my book, my ephemeris, when, for example, Uranus in the sky might be going from their sixth house up into their seventh house, and I can say to them, all right, it's time to get your whatever work projects you've been working on completed, because you are going to start to be paying more attention to your relationships and less attention to whatever it is that you're working on. That's a gross oversimplification, but it's a start to try and exemplify what I can discuss with people.
Many of modern day, societies, around the world frown on astrology, and they think this is all hocus pocus. So what do you have to tell them?
If somebody thinks or feels that astrology is hocus pocus, I have to acknowledge that and honor that and respect that. And that's fine with me. I was not put here to try and convince anybody. But what I do now is I often find myself reinforcing for my clients that which they already felt or sensed or were close to getting a grip on. A lot of life includes challenging activities and challenging events, and I can set the stage, set the scene for when I'm discussing astrology, a person's particular astrology. I can set the scene for them, and they can say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And so I'm simply reinforcing for them something that they might have had a question about.
So I'm sure your clients might have, from their experience, known that astrological predictions or astrological explanations kind of work or have worked in their lives.
Yes.
So do you have any special examples where, either in your life or in your client's life?
Well, I had Pluto go across my moon 5 times in 2 years, a couple of years back. And knowing that was going on, I was prepared for the transformations that were happening in my life, and I've been able to incorporate the ability to let things go and make room in my life for the evolutionary places that I've come to since then. That may sound awfully vague. I'm not sure if I answered your question that well.
Well, so you understand that some planets going through certain parts of your chart affect you in a certain way, and you've seen that from experience?
Yes. Oh yeah. I pay attention. I watch the moon. The easiest way for a person to learn astrology, if they think it's bunk, or if they want to learn it, is to take their birth chart and watch the moon as it goes around their chart once a month, and pay attention to when the moon is sitting on their Mars or transiting their Mars, and then pay attention to when it's going across their Saturn and when it's going across their Uranus. And if a person pays attention for 3 or 4 months in a row to what was going on the day that the moon in the sky was on their Mars, and they log it somehow, and then, depending on the person's chart, whenever later on in the month the moon was going on their Saturn, if they keep a daily log and then look back after 3 or 4 months, they will start to see correlations. Oh, a Mars day. Well, one time when it was on my Mars, I was really aggressive. I got in a fight with a cop. Oh, no. Another month when the moon was going across my Mars, I was really creative, and I started picking up paints and started painting. I hadn't done that in years, and it felt really good. And then another time when the moon goes across a person's Mars, they might simply have become really passionately involved in some kind of sports event. But you learn eventually that Mars is passion. Mars is physical. And Mars is creative. Mars is the warrior. You learn that by paying attention to your own chart. Don't listen to me. If you want to learn, you learn from the inside. So look at your own chart and pay attention to each one of the 10 planets, or 9, however many are in the chart that you get from your astrologer. Then it can make sense. Jeff Jower, and I were at UMass at the same time back in the 70s, and he is now a well-renowned astrologer of the day. He does Star IQ, which I listen to every day. And like I said, he's one of the most, he's a very well-renowned astrologer of the day, and he got into astrology on a $50 bet that astrology was bunk. He said he heard somebody talking about astrology way back in the day, and he went, "That's a bunch of hooey, baloney. I'll bet you $50 it's a bunch of bunk." And now here he is 30 years later, one of the best certainly a very good astrologer, and I would say one of the best in the country. I mean, but there are many very good
So
ones.
if a person has to watch if the moon is going over a certain planet, where can they get that information, the transit information,
You can
on
get
a
it
daily
online.
basis?
You can get it online. There are many different ways to get it. There are some astrological sites that simply show the positions of the planets every day. There are a number of astrological people who prognosticate astrologically. I was going to say prognosticators. Anyway, they are prognosticators, yes. And they will mention the sign that the moon is in. And you can also buy the least expensive, an ephemeris. The least expensive one you can get is usually under $10 for the year, and that will give you the daily positions of the planets, including the moon. And when you're starting out with astrology and learning, all you want to watch is the moon and how it hits each one of your 10 planets.
Yeah. I wonder how in the ancient days, astrologers marked out and charted out all the ephemeris. They didn't have all of the telescopes and the modern instruments that we have today.
No.
So how did they do that? I mean, would you know?
Well, it depends what part of history you're talking about. You're talking about 10,000 years ago or 3,000?
At least a couple thousand years ago, I believe.
Least, yeah. Well, there was an instrument called an astrolabe, which was, I'm really not overly familiar with it, but I know that it was used to help calculate the positions of the planets.
And I believe astrologers had calculated these quite as accurately as astronomers. Were they also astronomers in the good old days?
Absolutely, Usha. It was up until only about less than 1,000 years ago. If you were an educated person, then one of the things that you knew about was astronomy, and up until 1,000 years ago, there was no differentiation between astronomy and astrology. You knew where the planets were, and you also knew how to make the correlations between where the planets were and what's going on with you or your client or your country or whatever. You could put it together and discuss the potential.
Then, speaking of forecasts, you see all the magazines and newspapers having a little astrology section, and then say, oh, if your sign is this, and this is what is going to happen to you. And you know that there are only 12 signs. So 1 in 12 persons, he'll be in the same spot as another 1 in 12. And everybody's future is not alike, and things don't happen the same way. So what's with that?
You are correct, and what you're talking about is sun sign astrology. If you're an Aries, this is what's going on with you today. If you're a Pisces, this is what's going on with you today. There are a lot of sun sign astrologers, columns in the newspaper, which are curiously accurate. It's interesting. I never paid a lot of attention to those columns or to sun sign astrology, but some of them are really legitimate. And to be honest with you, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how those sun sign astrologers do it. And I also have this book, this birthday book, and it's amazing how they can come up with half a page on each day of the. I've had more people come by my table and say, "That's amazing," when they're talking about their particular birthday. I don't know how those guys do it either, but I do know how I do what I do, which is watch the planets every day in the sky.
So it's not just the sun. you're watching the moon and the other planets?
Yes.
Okay.
All of the if you take a person's birth chart, or what a lot of astrologers like to do if they're dealing with a client, is take a person's progressed chart, which is simply a progression of the birth chart to where a person is at this point in time, a mathematical progression to where a person is at this phase of their life right now. So,
What do you mean, where the planets are relative to when they were born?
yes.
Or, okay.
There's a slight difference, and a person's progressed chart is, like I said, is reflective of what's going on at this phase of their life. And then when an astrologer plugs in the planets in the sky, last week, today, next week, next year, last year, whatever, plugs in the planets in the sky to that progressed chart, an astrologer can get a really good sense of what's going on right now. What was your question? Do you remember?
No, just
Okay.
I was worrying about the sun sign and just giving prediction just based on the sun rather than the other planets in their chart and the transits.
The sun sign astrology has a lot of legitimacy, and there's a lot of good to be said for the simple approach of sun sign astrology. Of course, there are people out there who may not have the highest of intentions.
Yeah, many people think that some of these are very general, that it could apply to anybody and not specifically to them or
Sometimes
their
that's
sign.
true. Sometimes that's very true. But in a nutshell, sun sign astrology is a good place to start. And if it interests a person and piques a person's curiosity, and a person wants to go to an astrologer, then an astrologer can take it to the next level, which is not just sun sign astrology, not just a simplistic approach, which a lot of times does have its legitimacy. An astrologer will then take a person's birth chart, which has all 10 planets, or 9, depending on the astrologer. This one uses 10, including Chiron and 4 asteroids, but I digress. And plug the 10 planets in the sky into that chart and see what the mathematical correlations are, and then intuit, after the analytical part of it, intuit what's going on.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I think we should have you back again. I hope you'll come back sometime.
It would be my pleasure, Usha. Thank you.
To talk about more of the subjects. And thank you all for watching today. And until next time, goodbye.